let's take our Bibles here this morning and let's go to the book of Luke, chapter number 1. Luke, chapter number 1. Well, of course, it's during this time of year that the world prepares to commemorate the most significant birth to ever take place. Of course, we know that to be the birth of the Lord Jesus Christ. And though many of the things associated with the season can be fun and can be enjoyable, and there's the hustle and bustle and so forth that we all experience, I think, to a certain degree every year. But of course, we never want to take our eye off the reason for the season itself, this event of the birth of Christ. And over the next few weeks, I guess I'd like to spend some time just looking at some of the characters that play a major role in this event. Of course, mainly 3 of them. 2 were ordinary human beings, like you and I here today. There was nothing really that special about them. In fact, they would have been considered, kind of more on the lower class of society. But they were chosen of God to be part of a very extraordinary event. Of course, one of the other characters we know to be the extraordinary God Himself, who has gone to great lengths to show a very sinful world just how much He really loves them. Here in Luke chapter 1, we'll pick it up in verse 26. It says here, in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God unto a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin espoused to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. And the angel came in unto her and said, Hail thou that art highly favored, the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou among women. And when she saw him, she was troubled at this saying, and cast in her mind that what manner of salutation this should be. And the angel said unto her, Fear not, Mary, for thou hast found favor with God. And behold, thou shalt conceive in thy womb, and bring forth a son, and shalt call his name Jesus. He shall be great, and shall be called the Son of the Highest. And the Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father David. And he shall reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there shall be no end. Then said Mary unto the angel, How shall this be, saying, I know not a man? And the angel answered and said unto her, The Holy Ghost shall come upon thee, and the power of the highest shall overshadow thee. Therefore also that holy thing which shall be born of thee shall be called the Son of God. And behold, thy cousin Elizabeth, she hath also conceived a son in her old age, and this is the 6th month with her, who was called barren. For with God nothing shall be impossible. And Mary said, Behold the handmaid of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word. And the angel departed from her. Today we're going to start a brief series. It's the title of my message here today, as we talk about the characters of Christmas. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for the time we can come here and really focus on this story. It's a precious story, a very important one in human history. Father, today as we look at Mary and her part in it, I do pray that we could really glean some really important things about Mary, how she was committed and had a life of faith that really transcends many people. And Father, I just pray that we could just glean much from this example so that we may be able to put it to practice in our own lives, bring you glory and honor. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, as we read a moment ago, we see the first character introduced to us that will play, of course, a pretty big role in all this, and that, of course, is Mary. She was the one chosen of God to bear the Christ child in her womb and take care of his needs while he experienced the growing up process. Mary had a very, very unique calling on her life, didn't she? Very unique. Out of all the women that have ever existed, the billions that have ever come into existence, God chose her to be the one to give birth and to care for his son. Very unique. Nobody had ever experienced that. Nobody ever will experience what Mary is going to go through. And it's interesting to note that, God entrusted her to care for his own son. I think many of us here who have kids would say, you just don't give your kids to whomever, right? I mean, you want to know something about that person or people that you're going to entrust your kids with. And you want to feel comfortable with them because you don't want to put your kids in harm's way. And generally we don't, we do that as parents. I think we do that very naturally. Well, think about it from God's perspective. Again, he had some confidence in this a little bit in Mary's faithfulness. Now, I think a lot of us are familiar with the fact that there are some very unscriptural teachings about Mary that exist, and maybe sometimes some preaching gets a little shied away from talking about her, because before we're done with this, I hope you'll see that she was a tremendous lady. She really was. I mean, she had a heart for God that is right up there with many of the other Bible greats. But sometimes because of the young unscriptural teaching, there's maybe a little tendency to ignore her part in this. And today, we don't want to put her in a position of exaltation as much as we just want to take a look at a human being that had a great opportunity to do something for God. You know, there are those that put her on a pedestal, though, that I believe she would have never wanted herself. They would call her immaculate or sinless. They call her the Mother of God. In other words, it was within her the Christ child originated. And of course, she's been called the Queen of Heaven and other titles. Those titles, though, are simply not fitting for her. They are not true. In fact, verse 47, she readily admits that she was nothing but a sinner saved by grace like everybody else. It says, "And my spirit hath rejoiced in God, my Savior." She needed a Savior. She was not sinless. She was just as human as you and I are. But she was a chosen vessel. Her womb never created the Christ child, but she was the vessel in which the Christ child would develop. Of course, we know that Jesus Christ did not start in Bethlehem's stable, nor at the conception. He had already existed well before an eternity past. In fact, Micah 5:2, one of the prophecies concerning Jesus Christ, it says, "But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me, that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting." So in eternity past, everlasting, Jesus Christ had already existed. He had already existed as God the Son, the number 2 of the Godhead, the visible representation of the Godhead Himself. He had already been there. He had been there during the creation. He was an active part of the creation. And He was the one that voluntarily said, "I will go to earth and experience all that man has experienced, so that I can understand Him, and not to mention die for Him, so that He can have His sins forgiven." His birth, again, wasn't the beginning. But God was willing, despite of who He was, as we talked about during the 9:30 hour, how exalted He is, that He was still willing to come down to this dusty, dirty earth, and was willing to put Himself in such a lowly position to understand and relate to who we are. He wanted to experience every angle of human life from conception to death, and He was willingly did that. And Mary, her part in all this, was a simply privileged one who got to be involved in the process. Sometimes we think God gets a real good deal when He gets us in salvation. He doesn't get anything good. But He loves our soul, thankfully. You know, God lets us be involved in things. Sometimes people get this idea about serving God. "Oh, I got to serve God. I got to do this. I got to get up then. I got to do that," and so forth. And by the way, you should get 9:30's message if you have a problem with that. But Jesus Christ willingly humbled Himself so significantly to do such a thing like this. We don't realize how high God really is. And that He lets us be part of the process. He lets us be involved. He doesn't need us. He doesn't need us at all. But He lets us. Boy, when we have that kind of mentality, it changes things a lot, doesn't it? That God lets us be involved. He lets us be part of what He's doing. He gives us the privilege. It really is a very big privilege to be part of what God's doing. Sadly, there are a lot of people who don't see that. I don't think it's God's worth their time, their effort. And that's such a wrong mentality. It's so wrong. God gave Mary a privilege, and she saw it that way. This calling that she has in her life was a tremendous blessing in more ways than one. This calling, of course, we see at this point in history as being the blessing too, don't we? I mean, we can see it now. We see, wow, Mary, what an awesome honor. What a privilege to carry God in your own womb, and to have a chance to see Him and hold Him and touch Him and watch Him grow up and know a lot about Him. She probably would have had the most intimate knowledge of Him. And we see that blessing part, but you know what? During her lifetime, it was really a high price. A few years back during our 9:30 hour, I did a series called Lessons from Legends. It was a character study of a variety of different characters. And we did focus on Mary, and I remember studying for that message and just beginning to think about all that she went through as the mother of Jesus Christ. Of course, as we know, she's going to have a baby in her belly that was not conceived in natural terms. But who would have ever believed that? She would have had a child that was raised up under her that would have been absolutely perfect. And some parents would be like, oh, that'd be a really nice one. But I'm sure that was kind of disturbing at times. They never did anything wrong. I mean, he made his bed every morning. He ironed his own clothes. She said, do this, and he'd do it without a lick of argument. He didn't walk around the house pouting, ever. He was saying, that would be a real dream, wouldn't it? Yeah. But I mean, he was different. He was starkly different. I mean, I wonder at times if he wasn't mocked by some of the other kids because he would have been considered goody two-shoes. Now, I don't know about you as a parent, but if you hear some of your kid being mocked or anything like that, that bothers you, I'm sure. It wouldn't me. Maybe she heard the mockings of kids. Of course, he didn't run like the other teenagers ran. He didn't do anything like that. He was hard to understand, I'm sure, sometimes. Maybe he appeared at times to have his head in the clouds as he was talking with his heavenly Father. Of course, she'd watch him as his ministry took off. And saw him as being popular, but also heard the negativeness of the Pharisees, and she knew how vicious they could be. Of course, she was there the day they crucified him. Could you imagine if that was your child today? She saw him with his flesh ripped open, with that crown of thorns upon him. You know, if you're a mother here today, I think you know. Could you imagine how that felt if that was your child? I mean, she had a tough calling. She really did. But she was faithful to it. She was tremendously faithful to it. She was a strong woman of faith. She was full of total commitment to Jesus Christ, to God Himself, if you will. She had a faith like none other, and she was committed like none other. That one day I think people will recognize more in a proper form. Like many other Bible characters we can look at, she does belong in that as one of the champions of faith. I certainly believe that. And today we're going to look at her and see her calling she receives to be a woman who would do what no other woman would ever get to do, and how she responded to that calling. First off, let's talk about the blessed salutation. You know, as the gospel commentaries begin to open up, of course, we see the beginning here in Luke chapter 1. It's on the heels, of course, of God being silent for some time. After Malachi was penned, I believe that was the last book of the Old Testament that was penned, there went a period of time of roughly 400 years where God did not give any new revelation of Scripture to mankind. God had been silent for quite a while. And events unfolded in world history and even within the Jewish land area there amongst the Jews and so forth. Some of you have heard of the Maccabean revolt and things like that. There were a lot of things that took place in that part of the world during that time frame. But God during that time did not say anything to mankind. It was very quiet. Then suddenly, and a bit silently, I guess, the wheels of God's plans began to move according to His divine timing. Now, Galatians 4:4 mentions, "For when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth His Son, made of a woman, made under the law." In other words, at the right time, when God knew that this was the time to do it, He allowed the events to take place. Sometimes I must admit, I don't always understand God's timing on things, but it's always perfect. You go to Ecclesiastes 3:11, the Bible says He had made everything beautiful in His time. In His time. And sometimes God's timing just kind of can be perplexing to us. Why did God wait 4,000 years? I wonder after Adam and Eve got this promise in Genesis 3:15. This is the first mention, or the first prophecy of a coming Redeemer. "I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, thou shalt bruise his heel." You can pick this apart, but it's really speaking of the one day of the Christ child coming. Of course, what Jesus would do on the cross, bruising the head of the serpent, while his heel was bruised there on the cross. And I wonder, Adam and Eve, they might have thought, well, their first child, or their first, which of their children it would be, but of course their children would all pass away, at least their immediate generation. And then others would follow, and so forth. And for 4,000 years, God waited to bring this Redeemer. You say, why? I'll be honest with you, I don't know why. But God knew why, and God's planning is always perfect. Sometimes we've got to learn to trust God's timing on things. But Pastor, I'm not getting any younger. No, I'm not either. But at the same time, too, God knows the right time for everything. And now, in our story here, at this junction in history, which is now about 2,000 years ago or so, it was time for this fulfillment to take place. Of course, it began with the heralded two miraculous births. We didn't read into this, but of course the first miraculous birth was that of John the Baptist. He would be the forerunner. He would be a direct cousin of Jesus Christ Himself. In fact, it mentions in Mark chapter 1, verses 2 through 3, "As it is written in the prophets, Behold, I send my messenger before thy face, which shall prepare thy way before thee. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, Prepare ye the way of the Lord, make His path straight." This was the prophecy given and quoted here in Mark about John the Baptist, how he would be the forerunner. He would be the one who would prepare the way and announce the coming of the Messiah. And God, that's the way God works. God always prepares people before He does His greatest works. But it was a miraculous birth for John the Baptist. If you know the story, we can flip back just a few verses in our own chapter here. His parents were parents who had been barren. His mother had never conceived a child, and they were, let's just put it this way, older than average. They wouldn't have expected to have had a child, much like Abraham and Sarah. They're back in the Old Testament, but God did a miraculous thing in giving them of a child. But of course, the second miraculous birth would be the virgin birth of Jesus Christ itself. And in our text, we see that God sends His messenger angel Gabriel to speak to Mary about His desire to use her to bring forth the Christ child. Again, we look in verse 26. It says, "And in the 6th month the angel Gabriel was sent from God unto a city of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin espoused to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David, and the virgin's name was Mary. The angel came in unto her and said, Hail thou that art highly favored, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. And when she saw him, she was troubled at his saying, and cast in her mind what manner of salutation this should be. And the angel said unto her, Fear not, Mary, for thou hast found favor with God. And behold, thou shalt conceive in thy womb, and bring forth a son, and shall call his name Jesus. He shall be great, and shall be called the Son of the Highest. And the Lord God shall give unto him the throne of his father David. This was a blessed salutation. For Mary, yes, but also for mankind. Remember, God had been silent for 400 years. God had promised 4,000 years prior, but it hadn't happened. It hadn't happened. But God knew the time which it should happen. And now He's commencing it. And this was a blessed salutation for mankind. Mankind had been waiting for this, whether they realized it or not. Of course, it was a blessed salutation for Mary, because God had a desire to use Mary's life for something very unique that would bless the world for eternity. Look at verse 28 again. It says, "And the angel said unto her, and said, or came unto her and said, Hail, thou that art highly favored, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women." Again, she would do something that no woman before her and no woman after her would do. That would be to carry God in her womb and to care for him when he came out until he was old enough to take care of himself. Very unique calling, but it was a calling God gave to her. I don't believe Mary saw herself as anybody special or worthy, but considered the opportunity an honor. Look at verse 46. Mary said, "My soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Savior. For he hath regarded the low estate of his handmaiden. For behold, from henceforth all generations shall call me blessed." You know, she didn't resist the call of God. She went, wow, what an honor. What an honor. Look, when God calls us to do something, we are blessed people because it's a tremendous privilege to be tapped on the shoulder by God for a special assignment. And every person's got one here. Whether you realize it or not, God's got a special assignment for you. God wants to use your life in some capacity. You say, well, I'm just a little nobody. I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. I've already made a bunch of mistakes in life. Maybe so, but Mary would have been considered like that too. She was from Nazareth, remember? Of course, she was of the line of David, but that glory had long departed. If anything, her family lineage really blew it, if you think about it. You know, Nazareth, if you read John, I believe it's John chapter 2, that one of the future disciples, apostles, said, "Is there anything good that comes out of Nazareth?" You know, Nazareth was the wrong side of the tracks. She was poor. They didn't have a lot of money. In fact, when they go to the temple to dedicate Christ, they couldn't even bring the normal offering. They had to bring what the poor people brought. I think it was 2 turtle doves, if I remember correctly. You know, Mary was nobody. From a nobody town up there in the hills of Galilee. I've been to Nazareth a couple times. Looking forward to go again this year, this upcoming year. And you think about that, and there's vast hills over there. I mean, she was just might have been a hillbilly, if you want to call it that. But God had a purpose for her life. That growing up, she probably could have only dreamed of. I don't think Mary ever imagined that God would use her as he would. But he chose to do it. Because God specializes in using people, especially people that have a heart of humility like she would have. In fact, go over to 1 Corinthians, hold your place here, in Luke. 1 Corinthians chapter number 1, verse 27. Mary probably would have been considered this at her time, at least from amongst the people that she lived around. 1 Corinthians 1:27, "But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty, and base things of the world, and things which are despised hath God chosen, yea, and things which are not, to bring to naught things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence." That no flesh should glory in his presence. You know, sometimes God chooses the most unlikely people to do the most unlikely things. And sometimes it's not the big shots that God chooses, but it's the people that have a heart for him, that are actually very committed to him, though other people don't even really realize it, or they dismiss them because they don't, quote unquote, have the credentials or the education. Sometimes those are the biggest hindrances to somebody being used to great by God. It really is. Sometimes it can be a total detriment, because they get the idea that sometimes that it's because of their ability and their credentials that God can use them. God doesn't need any of that. What he needs is a willing heart. And that's exactly what Mary had. But maybe today you feel like how can God ever use me? Well, I'll guarantee you God can use you. It's just you being willing to let Him use you sometimes is part of the battle. God's able to take any life, regardless of the background, and use it in ways that positively affect both the temporal world and, of course, all eternity. That's a blessed salutation, isn't it? This would be really nice to hear. Hey, you're favored. God's got something special for you. God wants to use your life. God doesn't want you to waste it on yourself and just living for self and living to be entertained day in and day out and just living for your career and living for that. God's got something bigger than that, by the way. He wants to give you something bigger than that. Mary got that. But there's some challenging things that were involved with that calling too, as we talk about secondly, the bewildering spectacle. This opportunity to be used of God in such a special way was amazing. She understood at least a little bit of the depth of it. But of course, questions remained. As do when God lays upon your heart sometimes something to do, you start asking yourself some of these questions. Of course, one was a very big one. How is she going to have a child in her current state of affairs? Verse 34. Then said Mary unto the angel, How shall this be, seeing I know not a man? And the angel answered and said unto her, The Holy Ghost shall come upon thee, and the power of the highest shall overshadow thee. Therefore also that holy thing which shall be born of thee shall be called the Son of God. Of course, she was not in a position, if you will, for the natural means of childbearing to take place, if I can put it in that terminology. But this conception was going to be a lot different than that, of course. I think most of us are familiar with the fact that it was prophesied years ago that a virgin would conceive a child that would be the sign of the promised Messiah coming. It was prophesied in Isaiah 7, verse 14. Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. He shall call his name Emmanuel. The virgin birth itself is a cardinal doctrine of Christianity. And if you have a church that doesn't believe in the virgin birth of Christ, you've got a corrupt church. That's one, because this is cardinal. You don't believe the virgin birth, there's a big problem because you don't believe Jesus Christ was God. Because only God could have been born in this type of situation. And it makes Christ very unique. It makes him more than just a mere man. It makes him God wrapped in flesh. But only God could have made this possible. No human being could have orchestrated this. Even with the most advanced technology we have today, there's no way man could have ever done this. Gabriel uses the example, of course, to help Mary understand that John's conception was miraculous too. And she would have known about that. Elizabeth had already been pregnant for 6 months. And she probably, no doubt, had heard about what took place there. Gabriel uses this example to prove the point that nothing is outside of God's ability to perform, though humanly some things are absolutely impossible. Look at verse 36. And behold, thy cousin Elizabeth, she hath also conceived a son in her old age. And this is the 6th month with her, who was called barren. He made a real big point. Look, she's over the hill there, Mary, and she's never had a child. And look what God did to her. And she's probably thinking, yeah, boy, I remember that. that was miraculous. It goes on in verse 37. For with God, nothing shall be impossible. But this would be a bewildering spectacle. Mary all of a sudden pregnant. But for those who knew, and only a few would, it was a tremendous display of God's power. And everything God does is quite amazing to behold when you think about it. This past week I started into the book of Genesis again, and I have this kind of a way I read my Bible and so forth. And I finished one section, and it brought me back to the book of Genesis, and I started reading read through the first 3 chapters here so far this week. And I thought about the creation itself. The creation itself speaks volumes about the greatness of God. I mentioned this to an individual yesterday about Genesis 1:16. God made 2 great lights. The greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Think about that last phrase. Oh, he made stars also. Moving on. It's just like, oh, yeah, he did that too. I mentioned during the 9:30 hour that there are stars that are bigger than our whole solar system. God spoke of his own. And that's just one star. How many stars exist? I mean, there's these huge numbers that we can't even begin to wrap our minds around of estimates. But we only know a small fraction of the visible universe. There's a lot of truth to Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. You just think about that a little bit. If God spoke all this into existence, it's quite marvelous what he can do. And this virgin birth is really nothing. If the stars were nothing, this was nothing. God can take little things, too, to defeat or confound even mighty things. I heard this story one time about an atheist who when he died, or before he died, wanted a very large rock or slab of concrete or something like that put on top of his grave because he didn't want to be pulled out of it. So that they went through with that. They want God getting out his body, I guess. And when it was completed, there was a little seed of a tree that fell in a crack of that massive rock or slab of concrete. Well, of course, it was a seed that sprouts and grows for a while. And over the course of time, just got bigger. Nobody cared to remove it. All of a sudden, one day, it grows so much that crack, that rock was broken. Why do you go, little seed? That's all God needs to use. That's how, by the way, that's how weak we really are. You think about, some of these places around the world, even here, when you get sick, what is it that takes you out? It's this little itty bitty germ. You can't even see without a microscope. Boy, it can make you feel pretty miserable, can't it? It doesn't take much to bring us down. But that just shows how mighty he is. How mighty he really is. God can bring water out of a rock. He can raise up a nation and he can pull it down. Job 12:23, he increaseth the nations and destroyeth them, he enlargeth the nations and straighteneth them again. God can calm a storm. God can cause one to whip up. God can make the impossible possible. Ephesians 3:20. Now unto him that is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us. Exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. You really got to take some time to meditate over those words, exceedingly abundantly above all. That means the best that any of us could ever conjure up mentally, God could far surpass. Could far surpass that. In fact, the smartest human on planet Earth, what he could dream up, God could do. God could far surpass that. I'm saying we have a God that does incredible things. And this bewildering spectacle is really a little thing. Minor detail in the eyes of God, though to us it would be a major detail. So some might even ask, why doesn't God then, with all this power, do more those types of things to prove his power and existence? Well, you got to remember that these events, of course, to us are open and vivid, and we're all familiar with them. But you got to put yourself back in those days. Nobody knew this was going on. Nobody knew that the angel had visited Mary, other than maybe Elizabeth and her husband, Zacharias. Only a few people do this. Of course, Joseph would get in on it. He's kind of an important part there too. But that's it. Everyone else just probably would have considered her a harlot. Only a small, but the biggest events that were going on in human history were happening. But only a small group of people. See, my point is this. God is often moving in ways we don't see. We don't even begin to comprehend. We don't even understand. And they're mighty things. This is a pretty mighty thing that was going on. Very few people knew about it until it was time for them to know about it. See, Job learned that. You know the book of Job. Throughout that book, there's questioning of God and so forth. But God brings up in the last chapters to answer some of Job's and his friends' different thoughts. One thing he answers Job is this. Job 38:4. Where wast thou when I laid the foundation of the earth? Declare it, thou hast understanding. In other words, there are things you've not seen, Job, that you just experience now, that you will never understand because you weren't there. I moved in ways you didn't see. And by the time it's all said and done, Job's like, oh boy, I kind of spoke a little bit too rashly. I am so sorry, God. My point is this. God works in ways we don't always see. He works silently in the hearts of people that we sometimes we can't even begin to perceive. But He's certainly at work, doing a great work in people's lives. We can't always judge things based on what we see in the physical, because there's more that goes on behind the scenes than anything else at times. But two, God is also looking to display His power, but He often has to, again, silently prepare people first in order to display it. Sometimes it's very quietly. He has to prepare the people to do it. But the Bible does say, 2 Chronicles 16:9, the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to show Himself strong on the behalf of them whose heart is perfect towards Him, who are perfect, mature, prepared. Sometimes God has to prepare the person first in order to work through that person. So number one, they don't steal His glory, but number two, they'll be able to handle the blessing and all the pressures and all the things that are attached to that. God's at work in our day more than most people really realize. Even Christian people. They say, all this tragedy going on in the world and so forth. Yeah, I know. I'll guarantee you, God's at work. Working on the hearts of people. There are several places God is working today. And sometimes we don't even know it. You know what? I was just in Mongolia here a month ago. I see the things that God is doing over there to prepare people, I believe, for the gospel that I didn't even know about. I got there and I heard more things. I learned more things over there. I was like, wow, there's something going on over here. It really is. But I would have never known that had I not been there. And God gave me some insight as a result of being there. But sometimes you just don't know what God is doing. You know, you'd be surprised who God might be working on, who will become a preacher that makes a difference in a community. You never know who might become the next missionary to one of those unreached people groups. You never know who might do something great for God. And sometimes it might be somebody you never would have expected. But God can do that. You know, you may be wondering today if God is working in your life. I'll guarantee you He is in some regards. You may not feel like it at times. Maybe it just seems like nothing's moving. And maybe you even feel a little forsaken by God because it seems like nothing's moving. But can I say this? God is doing something. It's probably bigger than what you realize. You know, I may not be able to tell you what it is, but I know what Job said, Job 37:5, God thundereth marvelously with His voice, great things doeth He, which we cannot comprehend. And you won't see it for some time down the road. But I want to encourage us today that despite whatever obstacles there might be and what may be perceived physically, God's at work, making the impossible possible in ways that we can't even begin to understand. But we've just got to give him the benefit of the doubt, like Mary did, and have, thirdly, a blissful submission. Now, Mary could have sat there for a little bit and just kind of took that message in from the angel and think about, how's this all going to work out? She could have wrestled with the details. How is Joseph going to receive this? What if he doesn't believe me? Well, how in the world is he going to believe me? And what if he leaves me? How would others respond to her? My pregnancy. How would the family take this? No matter how much I said this, they wouldn't believe me. How are the details going to work out? We reason like that, though, too, when God taps our shoulder about doing something. Especially if it's outside the comfort zone. Most of the time it is, by the way. How's this all going to work out? I don't know how I'm going to do it. And of course, sometimes we'll even argue with God and give him reasons why we won't do it, because we can't figure out all the reasons. And as a result, some do refuse those callings, those things that God prompts us to do. But Mary, she had a genuine heart for God. God knew it. And she blissfully submitted to the calling itself. Verse 38, Mary said, Behold, the handmaid of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word. And the angel departed from her. See, she had to give the okay. You see, God doesn't force himself upon anybody. The angel said this is what gave her the long-term view of it. She wouldn't see all of this necessarily right now. She would not see him sit upon the throne of David, though one day she will, like we told. But he gave her the long-term picture, and it was up to her to make a decision. Am I going to be part of this or not? And she said, according to thy word, I'm all in. It was a big step of faith. She had no means of figuring out how it was all going to play out, but she believed God. That's what her cousin Elizabeth mentioned about her, verse 45. And blessed is she that believed, for there shall be a performance of those things which were told her from the Lord. She had to believe God that everything was going to be okay. She had to believe that God was going to do it. But in order for those things to come to pass, she had to blissfully submit to God's working in her life, just like we have to. When we blissfully submit to God in our lives, we are giving God the benefit of the doubt, and of course clinging to his flawless character, just like Mary did. Hebrews 11:6, without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him. She had to believe that God was trustworthy with all this. That God was going to perform all these miracles. That God was going to remove all the obstacles. That God was going to take care of everything in the end. And somehow, some way, in ways that she didn't understand, God was going to make it all work out. And she blissfully submitted, saying, according to thy word, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. Do we have that mentality today? Do we have that mentality? Sometimes submission means just being okay with your current walk in life. Sometimes that's maybe where it needs to start. Being okay with your marital status. Being okay with your job. Being okay with your family as it is. Being okay with your financial situation, or the house you live in, or the car that you drive, or all these other different things that maybe we tussle over, and we argue with God with, and we struggle with. Maybe today it's time to just give a blissful submission, saying, God, you're in control of it all. I hand it over to you. I just want to be like a Mary who understands in the end it's all going to work out just right. Because we know the end of the story for Mary. It does turn out very good, doesn't it? For centuries, people can look at Mary's life and say, wow, what an act of faith. But seeing things through her eyes helps us gain a fuller picture of her faith and the rewards that come by giving God a chance to use her life like he wants to. Maybe today God is trying to get you to submit to something. Be like Mary, knowing that in the end, God is always faithful. Going with God is always the best. And maybe today that is in the issue of salvation. Maybe you teeter, like, I don't know if I want to submit to God. I don't know if I want to repent. I don't know if I can trust God with my life. Let me encourage you today. For over 16 years I've done so, and I have never regretted the day I turned to Jesus Christ and salvation, when I repented of my sin and placed faith in Him alone to save me and to cleanse me from my sin and forgive me completely and help me be right with God. You'll never forget that day. But maybe you've been saved, and maybe today there's a little bit of submission that needs to take place. God's at work in your life, and maybe you're resisting that. Well, Mary didn't resist it, even though she couldn't figure out all the details. She couldn't figure out, and she had to realize she wasn't in control anymore. God was. She had to let God be in control, because there was no way she could iron out these details herself. And when she did that, God took care of everything. Stunning character, isn't she? Stunning person. But we can learn from her example as the first character of Christmas we're looking at. Next time we'll pick up with Joseph and look at him and see where we can learn from his role in this time frame. Let's stand to our feet today.